says, generally speaking, if the same crop is sown in a field for several successive years, growth in the later years is poorer than growth in the earlier years, since nitrogen in the soil becomes depleted. Okay, so we're saying if we grow the same crop in a field for several years in a row, we'll lose nitrogen. Even though alfalfa is a nitrogen fixing plant and thus increases the amount of nitrogen in the soil, okay, cool. So alfalfa actually puts nitrogen into the soil. Surprisingly, it too, if planted in the same field year after year, grows less well in the later years than it does in the earlier years. Okay, so even though alfalfa puts more nitrogen into the field, if we plant alfalfa in the same field year after year, it too will grow less well in later years. All right, so what kind of question is this?
This is a paradox.
Yes, and how do we know that it's a paradox?
Because it says most helps to explain the similarity between the alfalfa and non-nitrogen fixing plants.
Excellent. So what are our 2 points here that we think are it's weird? It's weird that it's happening.
So okay, so these plants, like over the course of these plants, nitrogen in the soil becomes depleted, but then this plant that is a nitrogen fixing plant increases nitrogen in the soil, but then we find out that it grows less well throughout the years.
Yeah, so it's like, how can alfalfa be a nitrogen fixing plant, but at the
Well, it
same
didn't fix anything.
but at the same time, if we grow in the same field year after year, it grows less well. So what do you think would explain why that might be?
I would probably go somewhere towards like there isn't enough of the alpha plants versus the other crop
But
plants.
this is putting nitrogen into it, and we're not taking nitrogen out. So why?
Oh, okay. So
Like,
maybe something got into the alpha plant that
every single time,
like pesticides or whatever got into it.
but that would have to be okay. What is this assuming is needed in order for plants to grow well?
It's assuming that this needs the alpha plant for the other plants to grow.
No, alfalfa is a kind of plant.
Okay.
So it's what are they assuming that all plants need to grow?
Nitrogen.
Nitrogen. So just because is nitrogen the only thing that's needed for a plant
you need
to grow?
water, soil, and all that.
Phosphorus, I don't know, like calcium, I don't know what plants need, other things. But like, what my prediction here is, like, couldn't alfalfa be putting nitrogen into the soil, but be taking something else out?
Oh.
Like, they're assuming that just because, like, yeah, it has all the nitrogen in the world, it's going to be great. But couldn't alfalfa be hurting it in a different way?
So even though it's helping with the nitrogen portion, it could also be giving other things too.
Or hurting it or taking other things, right?
Okay.
Like, could it, like, what if it needs phosphorus to grow, and alfalfa uses up all the phosphorus? So even though we have an abundance.
Oh, that's a good way of putting it too.
So let's go ahead and start with A.
Okay. Some kinds of plants grow more rapidly and are more productive when they are grown among other kinds of plants rather being grown only among plants of their own kind. No, that doesn't explain anything.
Excellent. All right. Well, and some is so mild, at least one.
Yeah.
All right. So what about B?
Alpha increases the amount of nitrogen. Okay, we kind of talked about that in the soil by taking nitrogen from the air and releasing it into the form that is usable by most kind of plants. But then it's a nitrogen fixing plant, so it doesn't take.
We don't care how it gets their nitrogen. Like,
no.
It's like, cool. That doesn't explain why it's not growing.
No.
All right. What about C?
Certain plants, including alfalfa, produce substances that accumulate in the soil and that are toxic to the plants that produce those substances. Oh, so even if though they're producing nitrogen, then they're also giving like toxins to like the plants too, or they're or the or
Yeah,
they
everything, right? It's saying like certain type of plants, including alfalfa, produce something that accumulates in the soil, and that something is toxic to the plants that produce
take
that
something
something.
like you were saying.
Yeah, so I really like C, but let's go on to D.
Alfalfa increases nitrogen in the soil, in which only if certain type of bacteria is present in the soil. So that's kind of like a reverse kind of situation. That's basically saying that if a certain type of bacteria is present in the soil, then the alpha increases nitrogen. And
yeah, and we don't care. Once again, that doesn't
no.
explain why nitrogen isn't grow like these alfalfa isn't growing in certain situations. It gives us no reason or explanation.
And the last one is alfalfa is very sensitive to juglone, a compound that is exuded from the leaves of the black walnut trees. No, we don't care about that either. That one's really off.
I'm like, I don't care. I don't even know what juglone is.
No.
Like, who literally cares?
I read the first word and then I was like, I don't care about this. Like that first word, I was like, no. So we're left with C.
Perfect.